Venezuela has broken off diplomatic and political relations with the United States after President Donald Trump recognized the illegal swearing-in of an interim president by the Venezuelan opposition. President Nicolás Maduro gave 72 hours for all U.S. diplomatic personnel to leave the country. He accused the U.S. government of trying to divide the Venezuelan people and promote a coup d'etat.
Did they leave him alone? I have decided to break off diplomatic and political relations with the imperialist government of the United States. Out of Venezuela. They can all leave. Enough intervention. We have dignity here. Here there is a people disposed to defend their country. I signed the diplomatic note giving 72 hours for all the diplomatic staff of the United States in Venezuela to leave. I am signing it in the name of the people of Venezuela.
Maduro made the announcement to thousands of supporters outside the Miraflores presidential palace. This at the end of a march in defense of democracy. The president reminded the people that it was the U.S. that pushed for the overthrow of democratic governments all across Latin America during the 20th century.
For the revolutionary changes which are America for 2 centuries has demanded and called for throughout the 20th century under the domination of imperialism. We were witnesses of a policy, an interventionist policy.
The Venezuelan opposition have also taken to the streets in several cities across the country. Addressing some of the opposition protesters, the leaders of the opposition-controlled National Assembly, Juan Guaidó, illegally declared himself interim president of Venezuela. The move was roundly rejected by those on the Chavista march.
We are asking the courts to respond to the big mistake this gentleman is making by declaring himself interim president. No one voted for him. We had elections and the opposition decided not to participate. Why do they want to seize power now? I voted for Maduro. Who voted for Guaido? No one.
It's a big mistake, what he's doing. The people of Venezuela are marching today in defense of the revolution and democracy, and against interventionism. This is a very delicate situation. We're calling on people here to join the national demonstrations, and not to respond to these provocations that are being mounted by the right wing in the country, and supported by the United States. We, the working people, are against intervention. The people in Venezuela are on alert.
Tens of thousands of people marched to the presidential palace in defense of the Bolivarian revolution. They reject what they see as an attempted coup by the opposition, and they oppose unprecedented interference by the United States. The Venezuelan armed forces also condemned the swearing-in of Guaidó as unconstitutional. This is all happening on the anniversary of the popular uprising that deposed the dictator Marcos Pérez Jiménez 61 years ago.
Because I am a revolutionary at heart, a revolutionary of conviction, because I work for my country and I'm here to demonstrate to President Maduro and to all Venezuelans that we must report this process.
The U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has nothing to do with us. He doesn't want anything to do with all of us poor people, and he does not like anything that our president is doing.
Today we are the Bolivarian youth, the Chavista youth, the Venezuelan youth, accompanying the Bolivarian process that is led by Comrade Nicolás Maduro. We as young people, as an expression of national sovereignty, with the expression of our freedom, of our democracy, we are today in the streets of Caracas defending the Bolivarian revolution.
And the Bolivian President Evo Morales has sent his solidarity to Venezuelans and President Maduro. Via Twitter, Morales sent his support, quote, at a time when imperialism is attacking democracy and people's self-determination. He also said Latin America's people will never allow the U.S. to use the region once again as their backyard. Support for Venezuela also came from Movement for Social Justice in Trinidad and Tobago. The movement strongly condemns the United States' interference in Venezuela's internal affairs.
We stand fully in solidarity with President Maduro as the legitimately, democratically elected president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We condemn totally the intervention and interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela by the United States government, as evidenced by the statement by Vice President Pence. That must not be allowed to stand. We must stand in solidarity with the people of Venezuela to defend their constitution, to defend their sovereignty, to defend their right to self-determination.
Earlier, we spoke with Lucas Kerner of the independent news website Venezuela Analysis. He provided some insight about the events that are taking place in Caracas this Wednesday.
Well, things are definitely very tense. We've seen consecutive nights of violence, particularly in many of the popular areas of Greater Caracas, the Cacerolazos. So there's definitely a feeling that there's a heating up of the streets in preparation for whatever may happen today. Chavismo is concentrating mostly in the west of the city, but also in the Plaza Brion to finish, a convergent march to the Plaza Oleri, where Nicolas Maduro will later address the march in the country. And then the opposition, meanwhile, is mainly concentrated in their traditional middle-class bastions, as well as, interestingly, in Cotiza, which was the site of the failed rogue National Guard mutiny on Monday morning that saw around 50-something armaments being stolen, and we're still trying to figure out what happened with that situation. So there's definitely the situation is tense, and we'll see what happens later today.
We also asked Lucas if he sees any similarity between recent events in Venezuela and the violent acts of 2014 and 2017.
I was in Venezuela and throughout 2017, and the situation, definitely the type of heating up the streets that we're seeing, these consecutive nights of violence. And I think it's important to note that, for example, at least in Pro Patria and Katia, where a good friend of mine lives, that at least in the Isias Medina neighborhood, these were not young kids from the neighborhood. These were kids who were coming in from outside, who were destroying, looting and destroying public and private property, provoking confrontations, attempting to torch down this Niño Simón Foundation, which is a social program. So I mean, these were not local actors. I can't speak for all areas of Caracas, but certainly, the same pattern of young kids coming in from outside, maybe paid by the opposition, we don't know, to heat up the streets and create a climate of instability and ingovernability that justifies the attempts to overthrow the government. So I mean, that's the same pattern we saw in 2014 and 2017.
President Maduro has also criticized Ecuador for the measures taken against Venezuelan migrants there. He said Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno is promoting xenophobia.
Recently, there were very lamentable events in Ecuador. And I blame the Ecuadorian government, and President Lenin Moreno began a witch hunt, a persecution, an aggression against the Venezuelans, and sometimes Ecuadorian Venezuelan Ecuadorians who live in Ecuador. Today we sent 3 planes to bring all those Venezuelans back to their homeland, back to Venezuela. We received them with open arms.
Hundreds of Venezuelan migrants in Ecuador are returning home thanks to the Return to the Homeland program. 3 flights are taking off this Wednesday, which were organized by the Venezuelan government after the recent xenophobic attacks to the Venezuelan community. Many are leaving the city of Ibarra, where they were attacked last weekend after a Venezuelan citizen killed a woman. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has details.
Good morning. We are outside the embassy of Venezuela and Ecuador, where around 280 citizens of Venezuela will leave Ecuador today under the Return to Homeland plan after denounces of xenophobia and discrimination living here in Ecuador. We should remember that two brutal cases of violence against women occur in Ecuador, and under this, President Lenin Moreno announced new measures to control Venezuelan citizens here in Ecuador. So they have decided to leave Ecuador under these aggressions against him. But now we will talk with one of the citizens that are leaving today Ecuador. If you can tell us, how was your experience in Ibarra?
Bueno, a raíz de todas las situaciones que pasaron acá.
We feel marginalized, discriminated for what happened with our compatriot in Ibarra. They think all Venezuelans are like that, but we came here to work, not to do any crime. Mothers cannot send their kids to the school because of the xenophobia. I wanted to remind the Ecuadorian president and all the Ecuadorians in general the agreements that President Chavez had with this country. We were seen as friends. So why do they look at us as criminals now?
This is one of the testimony here outside the Embassy of Venezuela in Ecuador. We should remember that the Return to Homeland plan was an action taken by the Venezuelan government after this denounce of xenophobic here in Ecuador and other places in South America. We should remember also that around 1,800 Venezuelan citizens left the country under this plan, and we should remember that these measures taken by the government of Ecuador was rejected by several organizations of women and social organizations of citizens living here in Ecuador of Venezuelan. It's all for now. Back to you at the studios.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The United Nations has encouraged Colombia to keep working for peace despite the attack that took place in Bogotá last week. The Security Council met this Wednesday to revise the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia, but the main discussion was focused in the possibility of moving forward in the peace talks with the National Liberation Army. The UN envoy in Colombia, Carlos Ruiz Maizú, said that the attack highlights the need to put an end to violence in the country. The son of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been linked to the family of an accused to murder Councilwoman Mariel Franco. According to local media, Flavio Bolsonaro employed the mother and wife of Adriano Malganes, who, according to the prosecutor's office, is a member of the organization behind the killing. Prosecutors have ordered the arrest of Malganes, who is currently on the run. Franco was killed in March 2018.
The mother and the wife of the former police captain and militia leader, who is a fugitive of justice accused of involvement in the death of Mariel, were only laid off from Congressman Flavio Bolsonaro's cabinet on November 13, 7 days after the Furna da Onça investigation was unleashed.
Rio de Janeiro's police has dismantled a criminal organization whose leaders may be involved with Franco's assassination. The criminal group operated in the west side of Rio, extorting citizens and merchants, taking lands out and trafficking with weapons.
Some leaders, there isn't just a single leader, but several ones, have been arrested, taken away from circulation, and an officer of the military police is unfortunately among them.
Pope Francis has just landed in Panama to celebrate International Youth Day. The pontiff was received by the Panamanian President, Juan Carlos Varela. Both are set to meet this Thursday. The Pope will also meet with diplomats and Central American bishops. He will leave on Sunday after attending the International Youth Day event. And Pope Francis's visit to Latin America comes as the Catholic Church is losing members at an increasing rate in the region. In Panama, evangelicals are gaining ground as more and more young people are abandoning the church, especially those from poor communities such as El Chorrillo in Panama City.
We approached the young people. We made meeting groups we called cells. We made short groups of an hour long, sharing groups, and through that we gained the trust of the ones who came to see us.
Now that I am in the evangelical church, I feel the glory of God. I feel the option that God has given me. Really, I feel the grace of God.
Ecuador's Attorney General has asked the National Court of Justice to forbid former Vice President Maria Alejandra Vicuña from leaving the country. The attorney's office also asked for Vicuña's accounts to be frozen. Initially, a request for her preventive detention was filed, but her defense negotiated new terms. Vicuña is accused of bribing people working close to her while being a lawmaker. Ecuador's President Lenín Moreno met with the International Monetary Fund Managing Director Christine Lagarde at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Moreno said that Ecuador has different partners in its objective to implement, including the IMF. He also said his government is open to dialogue with counterparts that have an impact on public policy and economic stability. The Zimbabwean finance minister is also attending the forum. Talking about the country, he said that the government is determined to fix the economy after 20 years of decay. Our correspondent has the details.
Political tensions are simmering in Zimbabwe, with President Emmerson Mnangagwa unable to attend the World Economic Forum held in Davos. Now, at that same economic forum, President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa is asking for the lifting of sanctions against Zimbabwe so that the country can get out of its current economic crisis. Now, Zimbabwe has asked South Africa for a cash injection of about $1.2 billion. But South Africa's treasury has since said it cannot help Zimbabwe at this point, even though it supports its quest for a permanent political solution. Now, a permanent political solution in Zimbabwe will be difficult to find amid protests that are going on now. Protests have been going on for more than 10 days in Zimbabwe, with reports coming out of that country that at least 12 people have been killed. Soldiers and police have been patrolling the capital city, Harare, trying to quell those protests. People are calling for a reprieve because they cannot find access to basic needs like fuel and food. Now, some 700 kilometers north of South Africa and Zimbabwe, the Bridge border, where Zimbabweans are trying to come in and out of the country to find those basic needs they cannot access in Zimbabwe. And you know, in Zimbabwe, the US dollar bill is the only money that works. And that is also hard to find in Zimbabwe for a lot of people. Now, the economic crisis going on in Zimbabwe is not the first challenge for President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government. Just few days or few weeks rather after being in office, the country was hit by a massive cholera outbreak, which the government had to deal with swiftly with the help of NGOs and neighboring countries. Now, the economic crisis now is stuck as a problem for President Emmerson Mnangagwa, with regional blocs like SADC, neighboring countries, Swaziland, Zambia, Mozambique, and South Africa itself calling for a permanent political solution in that country. But Emmerson Mnangagwa now is adamant that that solution will be found if all political parties gather around the table for a common solution for Zimbabwe. Now, back to you.
We thank Matua for that report. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The U.S. Senate will vote on Thursday on two competing bills as lawmakers attempt to end the longest partial government shutdown in the country's history. One includes $5.7 billion to fund the U.S.-Mexico border wall demanded by President Donald Trump. The other extends funding for closed agencies until February 8th. The shutdown has forced 800,000 government employees to work without pay or take leave. The European Union's Economic Affairs Commissioner says the risk of a no-deal Brexit is growing. The Commissioner says it's now up to the British to tell the EU how they plan to break the impasse. Britain is set to leave the EU in late March, but there's no agreement in place yet. Last week, Parliament soundly rejected the proposal presented by Prime Minister Theresa May.
The ball clearly is in the British side again. It's not a problem that can be solved by Brussels, maybe in Brussels later, but it has to be first dealt with in London.
And the Prime Minister clashed with Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament over the failure of Brexit talks. May said that lawmakers' attempts to delay Brexit do not address the voters' decision to leave the European Union. The lower house will vote next Tuesday on alternative Brexit plans as the March 29 deadline approaches.
And it appears that the only consistency in a strategy seems to be running down the clock on this by threatening no deal as an alternative to her dead deal. The CBI, Mr. Speaker, says the projected impact of no deal on the UK economy would be devastating. Leaving with no deal would be a hammer blow to manufacturing industry in this country, costing jobs and damaging living standards.
Taxi drivers in Spain are up in arms over services like Uber. Let's find out on that and other stories from around the world.
Taxi drivers are protesting for a third day against ride-hailing companies like Cabify and Uber, who operate under VTC licenses in Spain's capital, Madrid. Demonstrations came to a head when protesters used their cabs to block roads to the airport and burned garbage bins. Riot police were on the scene. One protester was seriously injured by a car with a private hire VTC plate, which increased tensions. Taxi drivers consider cab apps to be unfair competition because they aren't subject to the same regulations and taxes they are. Since the start of the protest, at least 50 VTC cars have been vandalised in Madrid and 80 in Barcelona. Greek politicians have begun a heated debate on the Macedonia name change agreement. The debate is over whether to ratify a UN-mediated deal between Athens and Skopje, changing the latter's name to the Republic of North Macedonia. Parliament is expected to approve the accord with a small majority. On Sunday, fierce protests broke out in Athens against the deal. Some are against the agreement because Macedonia, once ruled by Alexander the Great, is considered to be part of Greece and its history.
This is a historical deal which solves a national issue which has lasted for 30 whole years.
It is a mistake, one of those mistakes that if they happen, it is difficult to correct, very difficult to correct.
After several delays, Thailand's Election Commission has announced that general elections will be held on March the 24th. In December, the Commission said elections would be held on February the 24th, but the military government argued that election-related events would clash with a state ceremony. The Election Commission chairman told reporters that the date was chosen because it was flexible enough for all parties. It will be the first time the country votes since the military took over in 2014.
South Africa's president has promised that his government will not allow land grabs. President Cyril Ramaphosa made the assurance today at the World Economic Forum in Davos. It comes after South Africa's parliament in December approved a report endorsing a constitutional amendment following expropriations without compensation. Land is a controversial issue in South Africa because racial inequality remains entrenched decades after the end of apartheid.
And reform is going to be handled in terms of our constitution. But as it is being handled, we are going to take care that those of our people who were denied the right to own land get equity. Everything should be done on an equitable basis. And that is the only way we can ensure that South Africa does indeed become a prosperous country where all the people of our country do benefit from what South Africa has to offer in the way of a better life for all.
And finally, Zimbabwe's most successful and internationally renowned musician Oliver Mtuduki has died at the age of 66. He died at a clinic in the capital Harare after a long battle with diabetes. His death ends a career that spanned 4 decades and produced 67 albums. His voice earned him a huge following across Africa and beyond. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.